So now that we have our markup for stopwatch component ready, we can extract it into its own component. So let's go to the component where this markup is currently located, that is timeline item component. And right here at the very bottom, let's cut all the markup responsible for showing stopwatch, and instead use new component with the name timeline stopwatch. And then we're going to create new file for this component, timeline stopwatch, within components folder. In here we'll create template tag and paste the following markup. And now to use this component, we have to go back to timeline item component and add necessary import of timeline stopwatch component. And of course, we also have to import all those components that are currently used within timeline stopwatch component. One of these components is base button, so let's add a script tag in here and paste base button import. And in the same way, let's cut import of icon components from timeline item component, paste it into our new component. And along with that, let's also move import of all necessary constants: button type success, button type warning, and button type danger. So after this, let's remove import of these constants from timeline item component and check result in the browser. We don't actually see any visual changes, but in Vue DevTools, we can see new component, timeline stopwatch. So now we have to make this component accept one prop from outside, which will be time for the stopwatch. So whenever we're gonna use this timeline stopwatch component, we also will have to pass initial time that this stopwatch should display. So inside of timeline stopwatch component, let's declare new property called seconds by using macro define props. This property will have default value 0, type will be number, and validator function will be isNumber function. And then let's go up and add necessary import for this isNumber function. We're importing this function from validators module. And back to that component where this timeline stopwatch component is used. And in here we should pass one property called seconds. So now the question is, where do we get the value for the seconds property? And since this current component represents individual timeline item object, amount of seconds that we will pass to a timeline stopwatch component should be actually stored within this timeline item object. But if we take a look at the function which generates timeline item objects, that is this generate timeline items function, we're gonna see that every timeline item object currently contains only two properties, hour and activity ID. So let's go ahead and add one more property which will store amount of seconds spent on a particular activity. We're gonna call this property activity seconds. And initial value for this property will be 0. And after this, we can easily go ahead and reference activity seconds property to pass it to seconds property of timeline stopwatch component, like so. And after we receive this property within timeline stopwatch component, let's use it within template in here. So in Vue DevTools, if we take a look at timeline items array, every object now contains 3 properties, including our new property activity seconds. And then every object from this array will get passed to individual timeline item components within timeline items prop. And of course, that new activity ID property will be included in these objects. And finally, from timeline item component, we're gonna pass value of activity seconds property to timeline stopwatch component as prop called seconds. And sure enough, in the UI we see the value of activity seconds property displayed within stopwatch. But this is not appropriate format for showing time of the stopwatch, so we're gonna have to convert this value into appropriate format. And for that we're gonna use custom function that will soon declare with the name format seconds. And let's use it in here right away. Then let's scroll up and declare this new function format seconds, which is going to receive one param. We'll call it seconds. So here we will create new date object by using date constructor. And then let's just modify time of this object by using another native method called setTime. And in this method we're going to pass the following expression. So let's get an absolute value of the seconds received as a param in this function. And since setTime method accepts value in milliseconds, we're gonna have to convert seconds into milliseconds by multiplying it by amount of milliseconds in 1 second, which is stored within milliseconds in second constant. And then we're going to convert this date object into UTC string. So let's call it method to UTC string. And before doing anything else, let's just see what string we receive within this UTC constant by returning it in here. And by the way, we haven't even declared milliseconds in second constant. So we'll go to constants.js file and add one more constant with the name milliseconds in second. Let's just import this new constant in here and then go to constants.js module and right above seconds in minute constant, let's export new constant with name milliseconds in second. And the value of this constant will be 1000, which is amount of milliseconds in 1 second. And here's how our time converted to UTC string currently looks like. So we need to extract only necessary part from this whole string, and the substring that we need is this. And we can do so by using another native method, substring, on this UTC string in here. And this method receives two indexes, index of the beginning of substring and end of the substring. So by using another method, index of, let's just find position of the colon in this string, go to characters backward, and as for another index, end of the substring, we're going to find index of the colon, and this time go 6 characters forward. And this is how we extracted only necessary part of initial UTC string. And now let's just do a little refactoring and move this format seconds function to functions.js module, because we try to separate presentation layer from business logic as much as possible. And we try to store all the business logic within functions.js module. So right here we're gonna paste format seconds function and export it. And by the way, we don't have access to milliseconds in second constant in this file, so we also have to import this constant. Let's do so, and remove unnecessary import of this constant from timeline stopwatch component. And what we have to import here instead is our new function format seconds that we have just moved inside of functions module. And here we go, now all stopwatch components show time in appropriate format, just like before, but right now this format is derived dynamically, which will allow us to update this time every second in the future. Link to the source code of this project will be in the video description.